and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. My name is Jonathan, and thanks for tuning in. Tonight I have the rare opportunity to share an interview I conducted with Mulgrew Miller, one of the greatest jazz pianists on the scene. We sat down in his office at William Paterson University, of which he is the head of the jazz program. Mulgrew Miller is a true jazz legend and has worked as a sideman on well over 500 recordings and has recorded many recordings as a leader as well. Some of the people/bands that Mulgrew has worked with have included the Mercer Ellington Orchestra, Woody Shaw, Betty Carter, Tony Williams, Art Blakey, Ron Carter, Joe Lovano, and Niels-Henning Peterson, just to name a few of the great people that he's worked with. Mulgrew is a teacher and mentor to me personally, especially during my time at William Paterson University, and he's truly one of my favorite jazz pianists to listen to and watch perform. He's just an excellent performer and a person that you can really learn a lot from. This interview is a little over 50 minutes, and I really recommend you watch this and check it out. Mulgrew says a lot of information that I think is going to be worth something to you if you get a chance to watch this video. I hope you guys enjoy this interview, and please continue watching. We have interviews coming up with Michelle Rosewoman, David Gilmour, Kevin Norton, and many others. So please stay tuned, subscribe to these videos, comment on these videos, and continue watching. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I have the great opportunity to interview a true living jazz legend, Mulgrew Miller, one of the greatest jazz pianists that have graced this planet. Mulgrew, for people who are not familiar with your musical background, could you tell us a little bit about how you initially got started playing the piano?
Well, I'm born in Greenwood, Mississippi, and as a young kid, about the age of 6, this pickup truck pulled up in front of the house with a piano on it. My father had bought a piano and didn't tell us about it. It was a surprise, I guess. And so there was a piano in the house, and soon after that, I became sort of intrigued with it and started picking out little melodies, by ear. And one of the songs that I played by ear was a hymn, but that I had heard in church, called "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing," and and I kind of played it because it's all pentatonic,
Sure.
and I could find the melody on black keys, and I had played one chord through the whole song, and my father came home and I proudly told him, "Dad, listen to this," and he said, "That's wonderful. We'll have to try to get you a teacher." And so, to make a long story short, a gentleman moved to town and began teaching in the public school system. His name was Albert Harrison, and he taught choir or choral music. And he became my teacher for most of my school years.
Wow, that's great. So, did you guys work on classical technique? Was that kind of your...
Well, classical repertoire, not so much classical technique. Not in the academic sense, where you just played through the repertoire. So by that I mean, I didn't find myself working on a lot of exercises and things,
Sure. Well, I understand there was an aha moment for you when you saw Oscar Peterson playing on television.
Oh, indeed. I had been following Ramsey Lewis, who in the 60s had a string of hits, Wade in the Water and etc. And I have an older brother who had been traveling around, so he was in the Navy, and he kept telling me about this guy, Oscar Peterson. And I said, well, he can't be that good. I've never heard of him. And so I was watching TV one day, and there is whatever you call it, an ad for the Joey Bishop show that was coming on later. And he said, and tonight on the Joey Bishop show, we have the great Oscar Peterson. I said, that's that guy. I'm going to stay up and see what's to this guy, you know. And I heard him, and I can tell you, I was a different kid the next day. It was just...
It must have been...
It was an awesome experience, yeah.
Well, it seems like we can see now that that truly inspired you and brought you into the jazz world, because some people have compared your playing to the great Oscar Peterson, and some people have stated they can really kind of see your influence.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing about it. Oscar and I have close to the same birthday. He's August 15th and I'm August 13th. I've been told we have a similar profile at the piano and all that kind of stuff. But the similarities in there. He's a blazing virtuoso.
Well, I'll leave it to the audience to decide about you. But how did you get over to Memphis State? You went to Memphis State for... Yes,
a gentleman in my hometown felt that I needed an opportunity to study at the best school for jazz in the area. So he got together with the local arts foundation in town, Greenwood Arts Festival, and they gave me a scholarship, and he arranged for a scholarship at the school, a marching band scholarship of all things. And I was able to, you know, with some other financial aid, I was able to get in school at Memphis State University.
Yeah, well, I mean, I understand you work with some great cats over there. I mean, I understand as you started, James Williams was almost finishing over there.
That's correct.
And he was one of your mentors.
Definitely.
So to say. What did you guys talk about or work on when you were over there? Did he show you anything that...
Well, yeah. James, you know, James was the guy that... he had a lot of charisma, and, you know, he was always surrounded by a whole bunch of students. And but the thing is, James was doing everything that I wanted to do. You know, he had his own quintet, group and trio, and he had he knew all the tunes, and he had all the great records, and he just knew everything. You know, that I felt like that was the path I should be on. So I followed him around, you know, like a little puppy. And yeah, and James taught me a lot of things, you know, like about chords and scales and what have you, and tunes, and records and so forth.
That's really excellent. I mean, and one of the things that you've always instilled to us, I being one of your students at William Patterson, is that you put a lot of time in the woodshed in school.
Oh.
And can you tell us a little bit about that and your time there at Memphis State?
Well, yes, you know, if I could go back into time and be the age that the students are now and know what I know now, I would have gotten in the practice room and locked myself in and threw the key, you know, away, because you know, I realize that there's no easy way to accomplish much. You have to put in the time, and I don't feel that I was as disciplined and focused as I would have liked to have been. But you know, we're all gifted and endowed in certain ways, and focus wasn't one of my my gifts.
Sure.
But I tried to my utmost ability to put in the time.
Well, I mean, it really seems like that must have paid off because you finished school, or you left school
Yeah, I
early.
left school.
And one of the first groups you started playing with was the Mercer Ellington Orchestra. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about? And
Well, there was a guy living in Memphis at the time. His name is Bill Easley, a multi-wind player, and he had been in New York, and he had come to Memphis to play with Isaac Hayes, because at the time there was this whole rhythm and blues thing, and funk and all that.
yeah, it was big back
Yeah,
then.
Stax Records, and Isaac Hayes was big at the time. So this guy was living in town, playing with Isaac Hayes. But about the time I arrived in Memphis, that kind of rhythm and blues scene was dying down. Stax was going out of business and the whole thing. And so the Ellington Orchestra came through town with Mercer Ellington directing, and Bill joined the band. And so a few months after that, the pianist who had sort of filled in for Duke Ellington after Duke's passing, he was a guy that played shows and played for singers, and he was kind of established on that scene, and he didn't like to travel that much. So he was kind of getting tired of the road. He had done that.
Yeah, he done that.
Yeah. And his name was Lloyd Mayers. And so every now and again, the Ellington band would need a sub. And my friend Bill Easley recommended me a couple of times to sub in the band. And then, to make a long story short, a short while later, I eventually joined.
That's great. I mean, you must have been able to learn so much, especially from the son of such a legend,
Yeah, it was a great experience. I like to say that I grew up in that band. I became a man. I was 21, and I was hearing so much music. I learned a lot about the music and about the older music from the older musicians that were in the band, and but the experience of living on the road with 18 personalities, playing one-nighters here and there and everywhere, that was quite an experience.
Yeah, it must have been. So, Mulgrew, moving on, you worked with the great singer Betty Carter, and that was in the very early 80s, right?
1980.
And it must have been great to work with such a master in the vocal space of things, especially a singer.
Yeah. Of course, to tell you the truth, at the time, I didn't really know who Betty Carter was. When she called me, I hadn't, I had known who she was as a jazz luminary and an icon, but I didn't really know her music. I didn't know her style of singing. I had never listened to her. But, she had heard about me because I was hanging out on the scene and so forth and so on. And people started talking about this kid hanging out, and I guess somebody felt I was a pretty good piano player. And they recommended me to her, Cedar Walton and James Williams, among others. And so she called me. I was on the road with the Ellington Band, and I auditioned for her, and the rest is history.
Wow.
I played with her 8 months.
But that must have been an amazing time. I mean, especially working with a singer, you probably had all these very strange keys you had to learn.
Absolutely.
All the tunes in.
And too, this was the gig that got me onto the New York scene. You see, when I was with the Ellington Band, we weren't, we played college and country clubs, and so I wanted to be in New York playing with the Cats,
Yeah.
And so when I joined Betty, I moved into New York and sort of that was my introduction to the scene, playing on the scene.
So that's the New York intro, and then after that you were also fortunate to work with the late trumpet master Woody Shaw. Do you have any memorable moments working with him? I mean, it must have been.
Oh, wow, they're all memorable.
I'm sure.
You know, Woody, and I've been talking about him a lot lately. With Kenny Garrett was also a big fan of Woody's, and been speaking of him on some documentaries. And the thing I would say, actually, I really came to New York to play with Woody Shaw in my heart. When I was in Memphis, that was the one person I wanted to play with when I came to New York. Excuse me. And it happened. He called me. I was still with Betty, and I had been with Betty about 8 months. And he called me, and I said, "Solid." Nothing else would just. Yeah, I didn't have to know anything about money or anything. Yes, the answer was yes. I want the gig. So, and that was really a rewarding experience. I spent 3 years with Woody, and learned so much.
Yeah, what kind of stuff did you guys talk about when you were on the bandstand, or did you not talk?
Not as much as one would think. Those people. And when I say those people, I mean more than just Woody. They tend not to be very analytical and academic about what they were doing. They talked about music in a general way, the people they had worked with, and their views on the music, and all of that. But I can tell you, as everybody knows now, that Woody Shaw was a great visionary. He just had some other kind of ideas about how jazz was to be played.
Yeah, I mean, he's just an amazing trumpet player, virtuoso.
Yeah, and he put he put the language together in a whole nother way, different from anybody that had come before him.
Well, I mean, after that, you got to work with a really great legend, a true legend, and one of my favorite drummers, Art Blakey. And Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. You joined them for nearly 3 years, right?
Right.
And being part of that group, how was it working with Art Blakey?
Awesome. It was just, well, first of all, my landing the gig was more than I ever expected. Like I said, when I came to New York, I wanted to play with Woody Shaw. But I never in my wildest dream think that I would become a messenger and play with Art Blakey. But eventually I got the call, and there I was, And truly, he was one of the great icons and personalities that existed in modern jazz, And I learned so much. He allowed us to arrange music and compose, and it's just so much I had to learn. But the thing that I learned about all of these people, and especially Art Blakey, was about the presentation of music. You don't get on the bandstand and present a jam session. The music is organized and presented in a presentable way.
Yeah, I mean, all those guys, they really they put on the show.
Yeah.
And I see you have absorbed that, because anytime I see you with your trio, or see you with Mr. Carter, there's definitely a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And I let me tell you, I play with a lot of drummers, and a lot of great drummers, but I don't think I played with anybody that swung any harder than Art Blakey when he was on fire. It was awesome.
You must have learned a thing or two about swing from him.
Well, I learned how it sounds and how it feels, you know, from the drum perspective. You know, when I'm playing with drummers, I know how I like for them to make me feel, and that's because of my experience playing with Art Blakey, most of all, and then Tony Williams after that, and
Yeah,
Roy Haynes.
that's amazing that you were able to work with Tony. I mean, and adding up Tony to Ron Carter, you worked with two of the great rhythm section members of Miles Davis's quintet in the '60s.
Man, if somebody had told me when I was back in Memphis State and discovering the Four and More records with Tony and Ron and Herbie and George Coleman and later Wayne Shorter and all of that, if someone had told me then that I would play with the two rhythm section guys that I played with, Ron Carter and Tony Williams, I would have told them that they were crazy.
Well, it really was a dream come true. You know, it happened for you. So
yeah, and it wasn't just a gig or 2 gigs or 10 gigs. I was actually in the band with these guys.
You worked for Tony with
About
almost
6 years.
Yeah, a very long time.
Yeah.
That's
And I worked with Ron longer than
worked
that.
with Ron for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, how was it working with Tony with his concept of drumming as opposed to Art Blakey, let's say?
Well, it was a more sophisticated concept of drumming, but it had at its core the same thing that Art had, you know, because Art was Tony's first hero, drum hero, and I heard some of that same, those same elements, you know, that ferocious swing and commitment to the music and the commitment to excellence, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Tony Williams is another one of my personal favorite drummers. I mean, it's just him and Ron together. It's like that's one of the greatest rhythm sections you can talk about.
I always say, if I ever met Superman, Tony was it.
Well, you had both of those guys. You were fortunate enough to have both of those guys on your record, The Countdown.
Right.
And another great cat, Joe Henderson, on that record. How did that record come about? I know you started recording in the 80s.
Well, I was recording for a label, Orrin Keep News.
Yeah, Landmark,
Yeah,
right?
Landmark. And Orrin ran the label. And he was friends with these guys. And I told him that, well, you know, because I had done a couple of records before, you know, with sort of some of my peers, you know. And we decided it was time for me to kind of step it up a little bit. And I was already working with Tony by then. So Orrin had worked with all these guys through the years, you know. So he called them and they did him a favor. And I was able to get these
amazing
on the record date.
Yeah, I mean, as a leader, I mean, you've recorded something like 16 records as a leader, something along those lines.
and yet that's relatively few for the amount of time I've been recording, because There's a guy that's been on the scene half the time I am. They've recorded about
Recorded a lot, but I think you've told me that the recording is the documentation of the current performance or the current what you're doing in the time.
Yeah.
And you know, you've been on as a sideman on by some accounts, over 500 recordings. So
in the ballpark, yeah, about 500.
Well, I mean, what is your formula behind your masterful piano playing? What do you think makes you the most sought after, one of the most sought after sidemen on piano on the scene?
Well,
what do you think it is?
If I can pinpoint any one aspect of being a musician, I would say I try to be a team player, and that has worked well for me. You see, you know, not everybody who plays the piano are good compers and accompanists. You know, you have some guys who are virtuosos, you know, it's limitless what they can execute. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're good team players. And making a record in a band as part of a rhythm section, you're on a team, you know. The rhythm section has to be a team, and the group as a whole has to be a team. So I would say if there was one thing that you know, made people want to call me, it's that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think you have that, and then you also have that virtuosistic technique. I mean, and
Well,
beautiful sound. I mean, and a very, like, if I would describe it, a very confident sound that comes out of your playing. I mean, it's not only the notes that you play, but the sound that you have. How, like, who did you work with on that, or how did you come about getting that sound? I mean, it must have been taken some time, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, I haven't defined the sound. It's hard to describe, but you know, all I can say is that my emotions and my story is in the sound that I get out of the instrument. The way I feel about music and the way I feel about the instrument. And I always say, as I said to you students, you know, music is about singing and dancing. And, well, this music, anyway. And the piano is my voice. You know, I'd rather play the piano than speak or anything else. And it's my way of singing, you know, because that's what I really would want to do in my heart. If I could sing, I wouldn't have to play another note. If I could sing the way I really wanted to. But
well, you sing on the piano.
Yeah,
Definitely.
well, hopefully that's the aim, you know. And you know, I've had, you know, coaching and techniques to a degree. You know, I studied with a lady in Boston named Madame Charloff. She was the mother of Serge Charloff, the great baritone saxophonist. And all of that helped, you know. But ultimately, the sound that you get out of an instrument is basically the sound that you hear in your head and heart.
That's something that is very rich in your playing. Going back to Mr. Carter, Ron Carter, who is my personal teacher and mentor, partially thanks to you hooking that up. How is it working with Ron? I mean, you've told me some of the reasons why you enjoy playing with him. Could you share a few of those with us?
Well, let me tell you, a few of the qualities that Ron has that makes him such a great bass player. First, there's the sound of the bass and the sound that he gets out of the bass. It's a there again. It's a singing sound, kind of. You know, he gets those long, beautiful notes. You know, you see, in the past, you had so many really great bass players, but before the days of the amplifier and all of that, guys got a big sound out of the bass, but it was a thumping sound, and you didn't hardly hear the note. You know, so thump, 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 you know, more or less. And then much later, you have guys that get like a really long sound out of the bass, but they set their strings real low. So the effect of that is they don't get much sound out of it, and they don't get much of a beat. You know, and it's all amp sound. You know, but it's long sound. But Ron is the epitome of a guy who gets that long sound, and he gets a great pulse. You know, and then aside from that, there's a whole concept of playing the bass. You know, the note choices, the concept of note choices. It's you know, surpasses anything that I've ever played with. You know, on the bass.
Yeah, Ron's a bass scientist.
Yes, he is. And when it comes to walking the notes, chord changes.
Yeah,
he's the man.
That's
for me. He's the man.
Well, that's really great to hear your personal take on that. I think I agree with you in every aspect of that. I mean, Ron Carter is my true idol on the bass. Could you tell us about your current trio you're working with?
Yeah, the trio that I'm working with now, these guys have been with me about 6 years, 6.5, something. Rodney Green on drums. Although Rodney, he's been playing with me longer than that. As a regular member of the trio, he's been there about 6 years. But he sometimes would play as a substitute for Kareem Riggins, you know, so for years before that. So I watched Rodney grow up, so to speak. And the same thing for our bassist was Ivan Taylor, a young fellow from Chicago. And he was quite young when I hired him. And he's still quite young. He's not out of his 20s yet, you know.
Excellent bass player.
Yeah, he's talented. And so, you know, I view my group as a kind of a workshop where everybody can come together and work on their vision of what the music is, you know. It's not just a job where guys come in and get paid. You know, the guys have to, you know, ideally, they have something they're working towards, you know. And hopefully together we can create something that's worthwhile, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned also that, I mean, with this trio, you're inspired by some of the great trios of the past, and you kind of, I do think you channel some of that. I mean, Oscar Peterson's trio, Tommy Flanagan's trio, Cedar Walton, McCoy Tyner, Bill Evans.
Phineas Newborn.
Phineas Newborn.
Ahmad Jamal.
Yeah, there's a lot of great trios,
yes.
And I think you are one of the piano players that follow in those footsteps, so to speak. Now, moving on, I just wanted to talk briefly, because you mentioned this, and he's another one of my real favorite bass players, working with Niels-Henning Peterson. You worked with him. And you worked in a duo situation with him. Could you tell us a little bit about working with Niels?
Well, the first gig we did together was a trio gig. A promoter in Spain had this idea. He would book us on a trio gig with no drums. It was Phil Woods on alto saxophone, Niels-Henning Pedersen on bass, and me on piano.
Amazing.
So, so
Great lineup.
we went and played this gig, and I had met Niels once, but we'd never played together. And so we did the one concert and felt pretty good about it, you know. And, you know, I realized, you know, I was playing with two masters, you know, and who were, you know, established as, you know, jazz icons, you know.
Yep. And one of Oscar Peterson's bass players.
Yes, yeah, for 30 years or more.
Yep.
And so I did that gig, and it was, you know, in my mind, it was kind of like what I do, you know. It was just another gig, you know, in terms of my plans for myself, you know. I work a lot of sideman gigs, and that was just one where I was part of the picture. But then sometime later, Niels, being Danish, called me and said that the electronic company Bang & Olufsen wanted him to record a project for the, you know, this is Bang & Olufsen is a Danish company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they wanted him to record a project with someone that could play Duke Ellington's music, particularly the duets with Jimmy Blanton, and they wanted him to sort of recreate that. And so, you know, Niels, who had played with every great piano player in the world, he thought about me, so he called me up to do that. And so we'd make the record, and then Bang & Olufsen put some money behind a tour. And we toured all over the place.
Great.
And then after the tour for the company kind of, you know, ran short or whatever ended, we kept playing together. And it was a situation that lasted, I don't know how many years.
Excellent.
Somewhere between 5 and 7 years or so. And we eventually became a trio with Alvin Queen added on drums. And, you know, Niels was, he had been a wonder child, playing with Bud Powell at 15.
Yeah.
And he had a most amazing career. And he was an absolute virtuoso.
Amazing on bass. I mean, his intonation, impeccable.
That's
Perfect.
Right. That's right.
And did he teach you anything about playing with Oscar Peterson, or tell you anything about that? Anything that you might have learned from that?
Not really, because by then I had kind of figured out how I wanted to play, and you know, he knew that I was a big Oscar fan, and he would, you know, often tell me stories of gigs they were on or something like that, but he never insisted that I play any other way than which I play. And I think he kind of enjoyed the fact that I didn't play that way.
You were a different
yeah.
piano player, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, now, your time as the director of the Jazz Studies program at William Patterson University is coming on close to 7 years, right?
7 years now.
Yeah, and you came about teaching here after the late, great James Williams passed. How did you get approached about working here? And how was that for you as such a on-demand piano player?
Well, you know, first let's talk about James.
Okay. Yeah.
James was a great friend of mine. He was like my older brother in some ways. And well, let's say my career in some ways dovetailed his, you know. A lot of things I have done in my career, he had just finished doing those things, some of those things. You know, he played with Blakey before me, and even back in Memphis, you know, he played at a big Baptist church, and when he left, I played at big Baptist, that same church, you know.
Yeah.
And so these kind of things, and of course he was here for about 5 years, and he got sick and passed on. And I had never thought of taking a position in an institution like this, mostly because I didn't have a teaching degree or a degree at all, you know. And but I had vast experience working with all these people for, you know, so many years.
Your doctorate, so to speak,
Yeah.
in music.
Yeah, and so Dr. Dempsey here at William Patterson had me in mind for some reason. I guess he had kind of associated me with James, and we had met a couple of times, but I didn't think anything of it, you know, in terms of having a position here at the school. And I won't go into too many details, but I hesitated at first, you know. I didn't think I was cut from the right cloth to do this job, you know. Although I had taught many clinics and workshops, and I thought I was pretty good at it, but, you know, I didn't think that I would necessarily make a good teacher, you know, in this situation where I have a regular routine, you know. But Dr. Dempsey, you know, emailed me and said, you know, are you interested? And we agreed to sit down and talk about it. And my thing at the time was, and it still is, that at heart I'm a performer.
Sure.
I don't want anything to come between me and that. And he said, well, we can, you know, make that a possibility, whereas you can teach and still perform, you know. You have your summers off free, and you have your long weekends, so you can, you know, you still can perform. As a matter of fact, he said that we at William Patterson, we would like somebody at the head of the program who has kind of a profile, you know, a public profile.
Oh, well, a lot of people come to the program just to study with you and learn from you. I mean, and you've been an excellent teacher to me. I mean, I think you've done a wonderful job teaching here at William Patterson.
Well, thank you. But, you know, I'll say that, you know, I haven't been schooled as a teacher, but, you know, my heart is in it first. And I wanted to make sure before I said yes that I was doing it for the right reason. You know, I was making enough money performing, so I didn't really need the gig for the paycheck. I'm not complaining about it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be sure that, you know, I was doing it for the right reason. And like I said, my heart is in it, and I found that after some time that I really enjoyed it, you know. And all I do is tell the students what I know,
which is quite a bit and a lot to learn from. I mean, one thing that's really interesting that you've tried to show students, including myself, is your personal concept of swing, of how swing should feel, and what you've learned from the masters. Do you think that swing can be taught in a university setting, or do you think it's more along the lines of something that should be shown, or how do you think students should learn about swing?
Yeah, I don't think it can really be taught. But I think, you know, there can be certain pointers, many pointers along the way, and because swinging to me is an emotional thing, and you can't really teach that, But my idea about teaching is that you give the students their ears, and they can listen. If they learn how to listen for it when they're hearing records or live performances, then they can kind of get an idea about it. And then there's certain times when I've taught students, why don't you try this? Try this. And they say, well, that feels better, So then I know we're on the right track,
Yeah. Well, moving on to that, kind of as an extension of that, as someone who's learned this music on the road, what do you really think about collegiate jazz? Do you think that it should be taught in schools? Do you agree with that mentality of jazz being codified in schools? Or
if I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't be doing it.
Sure.
It's just that simple. And I was reading, there's a famous interview that Charlie Parker did with Paul Desmond, toward the end of his life, I guess. I don't know when it was. But he said, a musician should study. And, an institution that's what it's about, studying. You get the tools, the information at a school. And, I think it should be taught. And especially in this day and age when there are not a lot of Art Blakeys around and all those people that had great bands and great situations where youngsters can practice and get it together, So a school like this that hires performers, with that kind of experience, and they can share that experience with all of the students,
Well, that's excellent. I mean, I personally benefited from learning from you. I just feel like there was so much that you've instilled in me about the music, And,
well, and I also would like to say I learned as much from the students as they learned from me. In order to codify the music, as you say, we have to think about it in ways that we haven't thought about it before in order to communicate, all these ideas about the music. And so it's been a great experience working with the students, and we've had some dynamite piano players here. So, I'm looking over their shoulders too.
Well, I have a friend, a personal friend, and I'm sure you're familiar, Moses Howard.
Yeah.
He wanted to ask you a particular question, and I thought I would advocate.
Tell him to call me
up. He asked me, with a lot of the younger players no longer being able to just play straight ahead jazz to make a living, having to branch out and play other genres, so to speak, how do you think the people who do want to play just straight ahead jazz should move forward? Because a lot of us, we're really into the straight ahead, and unfortunately, with the amount of players on the scene nowadays, it's not as easier to make a living right away. What do you think? What do you think we should do? What's the advice for younger players who have the interest in following the path of someone such as yourself?
Well, I came onto the scene in a sort of similar situation, although it may be a little bit more pronounced now. But, when I came on the scene, a lot of young players were interested in playing fusion and all of that, But a young player has to reveal a certain kind of passion for the music. You know, every year or every month or so, or every day maybe, somebody's making it. You know, on some level. You know, everybody. Well, few people get rich playing the music, but careers
different kind of rich.
Yeah, right. But careers are still being built in this music, you know, all the time, you know. And it's those that reveal a passion for the music. And by that, I don't mean just an affinity for it, but, you know, they've learned so much and then learned the language. And above all, they can communicate, you know. Those that can communicate with a listener, a group of listeners, they can almost be assured that there's a place out there for them.
Well, thanks a lot, you know, for that, answering that question. I guess, is there some other advice you could give some of us younger players watching the interview? People who are, you know, awe-inspired by your career and your passion for the music. Is there some advice you could give?
Well, I hesitate to give advice about, you know, about playing music because I don't know if I'm qualified to give advice, you know, beyond my, you know, my job here as a teacher. But I would say, you know, if you want to play this music, you got to love it. You got to sleep it, eat it, drink it, and most of all, you have to play and put your life story, all your feelings in every note. In every note. You know, and realize too that the best thing a musician can learn is to learn how to listen. You know, that takes care of most of the problems if you learn how to listen. But to play and perform and deliver music that has beauty and passion and emotion, that's it to me.
Okay, well, one last question before we finish up. What direction do you think jazz is headed in the future? Or rather, where do you think it should be headed, in your opinion of the...
I've often been asked that question, and I really don't think about the future too much, you know. And the answer is that I have for that, and it might sound a bit smart alecky, but it's going to go in whatever directions the musicians take it, you know. But I can't speak for that because I don't know what's going to happen. You know, Coltrane might come back tomorrow, or Bird, or one of those cats. You know, somebody to take the music in a way and inspire so many people that the music, you know, instead of going this way, it might go this way. So I don't know what that might be. So I don't think about that. What I think about is just in this moment, in this day, telling my story and executing my vision of what this music is all about, you know, and realizing that the music affords one to be an individual. And I don't have to copy anybody. You know, we all copy at some point in time to get to where we want to get to. But after you get to a certain level, you know, you have to try to realize what your vision is and your take on the music. And I think about today.
pope. We pope, we did lobo edu ao lobo de tip. We do, we did three la da ba da lo lo de loba loba be do de little ubi ulu ace lo do 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 be lo pop we lo